He was wealthy, influential, and alone. She was a girl from the streets who wasn't begging for alms. She just wanted to take the leftovers of someone's dinner. He could have chased her away, but he followed her. What he saw in that dark alley changed everything. And you, where are you watching this story from? Write in the comments. We read every response. The night at the Golden Lotus restaurant in the heart of Silver City was steeped in luxury, accessible only to a privileged few. This was a place where each bite of food cost more than the average monthly salary, and the air shimmered with the scent of truffles, aged wine, and a refined arrogance. Marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers, the soft clinking of glasses, and muffled conversations weaving an illusion of serene comfort. James Winston, a 50-year-old founder of the Starbridge Innovations tech empire, sat at a corner table, adjusting the cuffs of his silk shirt. His company had just closed a $2 billion deal, and this dinner was meant to be his triumph. He swirled a glass of Bordeaux in his hand, watching the ruby liquid dance in the candlelight. He was on top of the world, but inside, there was a yawning void he tried to drown in work, power, and luxury. "Is everything all right, sir?" asked the waiter, a young man named Lucas, whose uniform was pressed to perfection and whose smile had been honed by years of practice. "Yes, Lucas, everything's fine," James replied, without taking his eyes off his phone, where the numbers of his new contract glowed. "Bring me another coffee and make sure it's hot. Not warm, hot." Lucas nodded and disappeared behind the velvet curtains that separated the dining hall from the kitchen. James leaned back in his chair, trying to savor the moment, but an unsettling restlessness clung to him like a shadow. He was wealthy, powerful, successful, and alone. Friends had faded into the past. Family was limited to rare calls from his sister in another state, and his life revolved around endless meetings, deals, and figures. He was about to order dessert when he caught a movement in the corner of his eye. At first he thought it was a shadow or a reflection, but as he looked closer, he saw her, a little girl, no more than 6 years old, standing on the sidewalk. Her thin figure was swallowed by a tattered pink hoodie that was far too big for her, and worn-out sneakers barely clung to her feet. Her face was pale, her eyes huge, holding a hungry glint that made James freeze. She was staring at his plate, where a half-eaten steak lay in truffle sauce with a side of asparagus, and in her gaze there was something more than just hunger, a desperate resolve, strangely adult. A chill ran down James's spine. "Can I have your food, mister?" Her voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the restaurant's hum, but it cut through James like a knife. "I'm hungry." His first instinct was to brush her off, call security, restore the evening's elite comfort. But something in her eyes, a blend of pain and peculiar strength, stopped him. He remembered himself as a child, rummaging through trash bins in filthy alleys, until Miss Anna took him in, a woman who became a second mother to him. James swallowed hard, banishing memories he'd long buried under layers of wealth. "Lucas?" He raised his hand, halting the waiter who was already approaching the girl with clear intent to chase her away. "Number, let her stay." Lucas froze. His brows lifted in surprise, but he nodded and stepped back, casting James a glance filled with questions. James pushed his plate to the edge of the table, avoiding the girl's eyes. "Take it," he said, his voice cold, almost detached, though a lump formed in his throat. "Eat." The girl, whose name he would later learn was Sophia Clark, looked at him in surprise. She didn't pounce on the food the way he expected a starving child would. Instead, she carefully, almost reverently, gathered the steak and asparagus into a crumpled plastic bag she pulled from her hoodie's pocket. Her movements were meticulous, as if she feared losing even a crumb. "Thank you, mister," she whispered, and without another word, she turned and ran off. Her footsteps were quick and light, like a bird fleeing danger. James stared at the empty plate, a strange unease growing inside him. He should have felt relief, pride in his generous gesture, but instead, questions tormented him. Why didn't she eat? Why was she in such a hurry? Where were her parents? Why was a child her age wandering the streets alone at 10 at night? He tossed a few bills on the table without counting them, and ignored the curious glances of other diners as he stepped out of the restaurant. The cold night air slapped his face, but James didn't notice. His Italian shoes clicked sharply on the sidewalk as he followed Sophia, not fully understanding whether it was curiosity, guilt, or something deeper driving him. "Mr. Winston, do you need something?" Lucas called out from the restaurant's doorway, his voice laced with concern. "No, Lucas, everything's fine," James threw back over his shoulder, not slowing his pace. "I'll be back soon." He saw her ahead. The small figure running down the street, her hoodie flickering in the streetlight's glow. She turned into a dark alley, and James quickened his steps. His heart was pounding. Why was he doing this? What was he hoping to find? But the image of Sophia's thin arms clutching that bag wouldn't let him go. The alley was narrow, strewn with trash, dimly lit by a single lamp that barely cut through the darkness. James stopped at the entrance, his breath catching in his throat. Sophia was kneeling beside another little girl, even younger, no older than 3. The younger girl lay on a piece of cardboard, her face pale, lips cracked, skin flushed with fever. Sophia shook her shoulder, her voice trembling. "Emily, wake up! I brought food. It's meat, like in Grandma's fairy tales. Please eat." The younger girl, Emily Beth, didn't move. Sophia let out a sob, her voice breaking. "Emily, you promised not to sleep so long. Wake up, please. We can't give up." James felt the ground slip away beneath him. He dropped to his knees beside them, his expensive suit pressing into the filthy asphalt. But he didn't care. The scene before him was too real, too brutal. Just a few steps away from the restaurant where people spent thousands on dinner, 2 little girls were dying of hunger and sickness. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed emergency services. "Hello, this is an emergency," his voice cracked, words stumbling. "Children, in an alley at the corner of Main and Star. One's unconscious. She needs help. Immediately, please." The operator was asking questions, but James barely heard them. His gaze was locked on Sophia, who was holding her sister close, whispering something like a prayer. When he finished the call, Sophia looked at him. Her eyes weren't those of a child. They held an exhaustion that shouldn't belong to a 6-year-old, and a kind of frightening clarity. "She's not waking up," Sophia said. Her voice was calm but fragile. "She's been like this for 2 days. I thought the food would help. Grandma always said food helps." James swallowed, searching for words to reassure her, but his throat was tight. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to speak steadily, though his hands still trembled. "I'm Sophia Clark. This is my sister, Emily Beth," she answered, her fingers clutching a locket around her neck like it was her only anchor. "And we're alone." "Where's your grandmother?" James asked, his heart clenching with dread. Sophia lowered her eyes, her voice soft. "She died half a year ago. After that, everything got worse." James felt his world shatter. He looked at the locket in her hands, and something inside him clicked. He leaned closer, his voice shaking. "May I see it?" Sophia hesitated, but opened the locket, her fingers careful, as if she feared damaging the only thing she had left. Inside was a faded photograph of an elderly woman with a kind smile and warm eyes. James froze. It was Miss Anna, the woman who had taken him in when he was orphaned after his parents died. She had taught him to read, fed him, given him hope when he believed there was none. It was because of her that he escaped poverty, went to college, and built an empire. But after his success, he had distanced himself, ignored her letters, never answered her calls, lost in his new life. And now, her granddaughters were dying in an alley, just steps away from his luxurious dinner. "I knew her," James whispered, his voice breaking, tears burning in his eyes. "Miss Anna, she saved me. She was my angel." Sophia looked at him, her eyes widening with a spark of hope mixed with disbelief. "You knew Grandma?" Her voice wavered. She said she helped people, but no one helped us." James closed his eyes, his heart aching. He should have been there, should have answered those letters Miss Anna had sent, asking for help. But he was too busy, too consumed by his success to see her please. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry I wasn't there, but I'm here now. I'll help you." Sirens pierced the silence, and soon the alley was filled with light and voices. The medics lifted Emily. Sophia clung to her hand, her small figure seeming even smaller next to the bustle of adults. James followed them, his mind a whirl of thoughts. He couldn't just walk away, not now, knowing whose children they were. At Riverside Hospital, he spent the entire night in the corridor while the doctors fought for Emily's life. Sophia sat beside him, her small hand gripping his fingers like he was her only anchor in the world. "Will she make it?" she asked, her voice barely audible, but in it was a hope so intense it hurt James to hear. "They'll do everything they can," he replied, trying to sound confident, even though he feared the answer himself. "I promise, you won't be alone." The next few days were a whirlwind of hospital corridors, phone calls, and decisions James had never imagined himself making. Emily was in critical condition, malnutrition, infection, the frailty of a child who had been without enough food or care for far too long. Despite her young age, Sophia bore it all with a resilience that stunned James. But her eyes betrayed a deep fear and exhaustion she struggled to hide. James didn't leave their side. He canceled meetings, ignored calls from the board of directors. His assistant, Clara, phoned every 2 hours, her voice frantic. "James, you can't just disappear," she nearly shouted into the phone. "We have negotiations with Global Tech next week. That's billions." "Clara, figure it out," he snapped back, his voice firm but weary. "There are things more important. Tell them I'm busy." Clara sighed, but didn't argue further. James hired the best doctors, paid every bill, but he knew money couldn't fix what was truly broken. Sophia and Emily didn't just need treatment. They needed a home, care, a family. He began to learn their story, and every new detail felt like a blow. After Miss Anna's death, the girls had been left with their father, William Collins, who battled an addiction to opioids. He tried to keep the family together, working in construction, but the losses, the drugs, they destroyed everything. Sophia, at only 6 years old, had taken it upon herself to care for her sister, scrounging for food, hiding from social workers so they wouldn't be separated. She had learned to be invisible, to avoid prying eyes, to find corners where they could wait out the night. Her strength amazed James, even as it broke his heart. One evening, sitting beside Emily's hospital bed, Sophia pulled out the locket and opened it, her fingers trembling. "Grandma said kind people always find their way," she whispered, looking at Miss Anna's photo. "But I thought she was wrong. No one came after her." James looked at her, his throat tightening. He saw himself in her, a boy who had once stopped believing in kindness until Miss Anna had shown him it was real. "She wasn't wrong, Sophia," he said softly. "Sometimes people just need time to remember who they really are. I'm here now, and I won't leave." Emily began to recover within a week. Her cheeks regained color, and faint laughter began to ring out in the room when Sophia showed her the drawings she made with colored pencils James had bought in the hospital gift shop. Sophia, still wary, began to trust James. He took them to his mansion in the suburbs of Silver City, where tall windows bathed the rooms in light and the garden smelled of lavender and freshly cut grass. The girls, used to alleys, hunger and cold, slowly grew accustomed to this new world. Sophia would touch the soft sofas hesitantly, as if afraid she might dirty them, while Emily, just starting to walk again, would run down the hallways, her bare feet slapping against the wooden floors. "It's like a fairy tale," Sophia said one day, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink. "But fairy tales always end, don't they?" James sat down beside her, his voice warm but resolute. "Not this one, Sophia. I promise. You're home now." But promises were never simple. William Collins, their father, was in a rehab clinic called Hope Springs on the outskirts of the city. James visited him, trying to see if he could be part of the girls' lives. William was a broken man, thin, with hollow cheeks, and eyes filled with both shame and a glimmer of hope. He sat in the visitor's room, nervously picking at the edge of his shirt. "I let them down," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to be a good father, but everything fell apart. After Anna died, I just broke. But I want to fix it. For them." James looked at him, fighting the anger that wanted to pour out. He wanted to shout, to blame William for leaving Sophia and Emily to die in the streets. But he saw the sincerity in his eyes, the real remorse. "They love you, William," he said finally. "But you have to prove you can be their father. It's not about words, it's about actions." William nodded, tears glinting in his eyes. "I know. I'll do whatever it takes." A month later, William saw his daughters for the first time in a long while. The meeting was in the clinic's visitors' room, which smelled of antiseptic and fresh coffee. When Emily saw her father, she ran to him, her tiny arms wrapping around his neck. "Daddy, you're back!" Her voice rang with joy, and she clung to him like she was afraid he would vanish. Sophia stood off to the side, her eyes guarded, arms crossed over her chest. She approached slowly, holding James's hand, her gaze steady and almost grown up. "You won't leave again?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with pain. "You promised before, but you left." William sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he reached out, though he didn't touch her, as if afraid she'd pull away. "Never again, Sophia," he said, his voice trembling. "I swear, I was weak, but I'm fighting now. For you." Sophia looked at him, her lips trembling, but she didn't cry. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and stepped forward, letting her father hug her. James watched the scene, his heart aching. He had become family to these girls, but he understood that their bond with their father was part of their healing. He decided to support William, paying for his treatment, helping him find work, but never wavering from his own promise to be there for Sophia and Emily. A year later, James's mansion was full of life. Sophia was in school, her drawings, vivid landscapes and portraits of Emily, hung on the living room walls. Emily, now healthy and energetic, ran through the garden, her laughter mingling with bird song. William, sober for 10 months, worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop and visited the girls every week. He brought small gifts, a teddy bear for Emily, a sketchbook for Sophia, and every time he looked at them with a love so deep it convinced James that people can change. James became the girls' legal guardian, but he never severed their bond with their father. He established the Miss Anna Foundation, dedicated to helping children from impoverished families with food, shelter, medical care, and education. At the foundation's opening ceremony, Sophia stood on stage in a blue dress James had bought her for the occasion, her voice clear despite a slight tremor. "Grandma said that kindness can change the world," she said, looking out at the gathered crowd. "She was right. Thank you to everyone who helps children like us. You make the world a better place." James watched her, tears filling his eyes. He was no longer the lonely magnate whose life was measured in numbers on a screen. He was part of something bigger, a family he had chosen for himself, and a mission that gave his life new meaning. But the change didn't stop at his home. Sophia and Emily's story, published in the local Silver Times newspaper, spread throughout the city. Residents began bringing food to the Golden Lotus for those in need, and Lucas, the waiter, organized a volunteer group that delivered supplies to shelters. The restaurant, once a symbol of luxury, became a place where the rich and the poor intersected, united by a common purpose. Inspired by this, James funded the renovation of the old shelter where he had once lived, turning it into a modern center for children. One evening, sitting in the garden with the girls, James watched as Emily chased fireflies and Sophia sketched stars in her notebook. He turned to Sophia, his voice gentle. "Do you ever think about your grandmother?" Sophia nodded, her eyes never leaving the page. "Every day. She would have loved this garden, and she would have been proud of you." James smiled, his heart swelling with warmth. "I hope so, Sophia. I hope she sees us." Sophia and Emily's story changed not just James, but Silver City itself. It reminded people that heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about quiet acts, a hand held out, a heart left open, a promise kept. James Winston, once a lonely billionaire, had found a family and a purpose that made him richer than all his billions. And Sophia and Emily, the little girls from the alley, became symbols of hope, proving that even in the darkest times, kindness can light the way. If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. We believe that even one simple decision can change someone's fate. And what about you? Do you think it was right to intervene? Write in the comments, what would you have done?